The universe knows 1,000 hells, but only one is a cradle, a world of endless sand, baked by the light of a hostile star, where life clings to existence by a thread of moisture and will. This is the planet Arrakis, known by a name that has echoed through the corridors of imperial power and the whispers of mystics for millennia. Dune. It is a place of death, a graveyard of ambitions. Yet from its unforgiving heart, it yields the greatest treasure in the cosmos, the spice melange. But the spice is not the only marvel born of Dune's furnace. For on this world, shaped by its harsh realities, lived a people as formidable and resilient as the rock and sand itself. They were the Fremen, the free people of Arrakis, a society so insular and perfectly adapted that the Imperium dismissed them as scattered, backward savages, never suspecting that their true numbers reached into the millions, hidden in the deep desert. Their story is one of survival, faith, and a storm that would engulf the galaxy. To understand the hurricane that was Paul Muad'Dib's jihad, one must first understand the single, hardened grain of sand from which it grew. One must understand the Fremen. Their origins are a tale of persecution and pilgrimage, stretching back into the clouded history before the rise of the great houses and the formation of the Imperium. They were not always of the sand. They began as the Zensunni wanderers, a religious sect born from the fusion of ancient Terran beliefs, a syncretic path, blending the introspective discipline of Zen with the devotional surrender of Sunni Islam. They followed the teachings of a third Muhammad, seeking a path of spiritual purity in a galaxy increasingly consumed by materialism and machine thinking in the wake of the Butlerian Jihad. Their faith was a contemplative one, focused on inner harmony and the observation of the natural world as a reflection of the divine. But their refusal to conform, their quiet rejection of the dominant religious and political structures, made them targets. They were driven from world to world, from Poratrin to Seleucia Secundus, and then to Bela Tegeus, a people in a constant state of retreat, carrying their traditions and their sacred texts with them across the cold void of space. This long exodus hardened them, stripping away all that was not essential, boiling their culture down to its core tenets of community, faith, and endurance. After generations of flight, their journey brought them to Arrakis. It was not a promised land. To the galaxy, it was a worthless backwater, a desert wasteland notable only for its punishing climate and the strange, geriatric spice. For the Zensunni, it was simply the next refuge, perhaps the final one. Here, on a world where no one else wished to live, they might finally be left in peace. They settled into the marginal existence the planet allowed, scavenging technology from abandoned prospector outposts and trading with the occasional off-world merchant at the fledgling spaceport. They learned the rhythms of the deep desert, the way the sand breathes and shifts, the secrets of survival, where none should exist. But they lived in fear. They lived in fear of the sun, of the thirst, and above all, of the demons they called Shai-Hulud, the great sandworms, that ruled the deep desert, colossal beings whose passage was a form of geological event, capable of swallowing entire settlements without a trace. They did not yet understand the creature's life cycle, nor the role of its larval form, the sandtrout, the so-called little makers that encapsulated the planet's water deep beneath the surface, ensuring the desert's continued dominion. This precarious existence, balanced on the knife's edge of survival, was shattered by one man, Salim, a figure who would become a prophet in their foundational myths. Salim was an outcast, banished from his community for the ultimate crime, the theft of water. Though he was innocent, his exile cast him into the furnace of the deep desert, a death sentence for any man. It was there, alone and facing oblivion, that he had his revelation. In a stroke of desperate genius or divine inspiration, he did not flee from the demon of the sand. He faced it. He learned to read its movements, to anticipate its approach by observing the spice blows that heralded its activity, and finally, to master it, using a pair of maker hooks to pry open a segment of its armored plates, exposing the soft flesh within and steering the beast by creating an irritation it sought to escape. He became the first of his people to ride a sandworm. In that moment, the universe shifted. The worm was not a demon to be feared, but a physical manifestation of the one God they had always worshipped, a powerful, untamable force of nature that created and governed their world. Salim gathered followers, those who saw the truth in his new way, a path that embraced the desert rather than cowering from it. They declared themselves the free men of Arrakis, a name that time would shorten to the one the galaxy would come to know and fear, the Fremen. From this spiritual awakening, a new culture was forged, one in which every aspect of life was dictated by the twin realities of Arrakis, the scarcity of water and the divinity of the worm. Water was more than life. It was the measure of all things. It was wealth, community, and the soul of the tribe. This philosophy was embodied in their most iconic piece of technology, the stillsuit. Far more than a simple survival garment, the stillsuit was a wearable, closed-system reclamation plant, a micro-sandwich of specialized fabrics. It was designed to dissipate heat while capturing every iota of the body's moisture. Perspiration from the skin, the vapor in one's breath, even the filtered urea and feces all were collected, purified in catch pockets, and made available to drink through a tube at the neck. With a well-fitted suit and proper water discipline, a Fremen could survive for weeks in the open desert, losing less than a thimbleful of water a day. This technology, combined with a physiological adaptation that allowed their blood to clot almost instantly upon exposure to air, made them true masters of the arid landscape. The law of water permeated their society. A person's water was not their own, it belonged to the tribe. Upon death, a Fremen was not buried or burned. Their body was taken to a destil, where it was reverently rendered down into its constituent moisture. This water was then added to the communal cisterns of the Sietch, the deep, hidden cave communities where the Fremen lived. To share water was the ultimate bond. To shed tears was a gift of profound reverence, offered only at times of great sorrow or honor. Spitting, a gesture of contempt elsewhere in the galaxy, was for the Fremen the highest of compliments, a willing sacrifice of one's own precious body moisture. Their entire economy was based on water rings, tokens that represented specific measures of water held in the tribe's hidden reservoirs. A man's wealth was counted in the liters he contributed to the survival of all. This communal bond was absolute. In their system of justice, trial by combat, the Amtal was the final arbiter of disputes. But there was a catch, a principle of accountability that defined their way. The victor of a duel to the death became responsible for the wife, children, and water debt of the one he had slain. A life taken meant a life owed. Within the Sietch, life was governed by the Naib, the leader who ruled by absolute authority, a position earned and maintained through strength and wisdom. He could be challenged at any time, ensuring that only the strongest could ever lead. But the spiritual heart of the Sietch was the Sayadina, the wise woman, who served as the keeper of the tribe's traditions and the acolyte of their faith. She presided over the rituals, interpreted the omens, and guided the spiritual health of her people. The Sayadina were the Fremen equivalent of the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers, capable of entering a trance state to access the collective memory of their female ancestors. This ability was unlocked through a perilous ritual, the consumption of the water of life, the highly toxic bile produced by a drowned sandworm. This spice agony was a trial by fire. The acolyte had to internally transmute the potent poison into a harmless substance, a process which, if successful, unlocked the minds of all her female forebears. For a Sayadina to survive this ordeal was to prove herself worthy of leading her people's souls. It was this deep, ingrained religiosity that made the Fremen vulnerable to a force from beyond the stars. For centuries, the Bene Gesserit sisterhood had been seeding the galaxy with engineered myths through their program, the Missionaria Protectiva. On countless primitive worlds, they planted prophecies of a Messiah, a voice from the outer world who would come to lead the people to paradise. On Arrakis, this legend was known as the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world, and it spoke of a Mahdi who would lead them to paradise, a green and verdant Arrakis. It was a failsafe, a tool of manipulation designed to protect a Bene Gesserit should she ever be stranded on a hostile world. They never imagined that the prophecy would not just be believed, but that it would find a host so powerful it would ignite the universe. The Fremen worldview, centered on survival, made them the most formidable hand-to-hand combatants in the known universe. In a galaxy dominated by personal energy shields, conventional warfare had been transformed. The Holtzman shield deflected any fast-moving projectile, making firearms all but useless. Energy weapons like lasguns, when fired at a shield, would trigger a subatomic fusion, an explosion that would destroy attacker, defender, and everything nearby. Thus, combat had reverted to the knife and the blade, fought at a slow, deliberate pace to penetrate the shield's defense. But the Fremen used no shields. The energy field's vibration drove the sandworms into a territorial frenzy, a fatal attraction in the open desert. Forced to fight unshielded, the Fremen developed a style of combat that was a blur of hyper-aggressive motion, unconstrained by the need to slow their blades. When Paul and his mother Jessica introduced them to the Bene Gesserit martial art known as the Weirding Way, it was the fusion of two deadly sciences. The Fremen's raw ferocity was now guided by the Bene Gesserit's perfect knowledge of muscle, nerve, and psychological manipulation. They became something more than human warriors. Their signature weapon was the crysknife. It was no mere dagger. Each knife was ground from the crystal tooth of a dead sandworm, a sacred process that tied the weapon to Shai-Hulud itself. A crysknife was considered a living part of the Fremen who owned it. According to their law, once a knife was drawn from its sheath, it could not be returned until it had drawn blood. To outsiders, this was a fearsome tradition. To the Fremen, it was a simple truth. The knife was an extension of their will to survive, and that will was never expressed lightly. They were masters of guerrilla warfare, using the desert itself as a weapon. They moved with the sandwalk, an arrhythmic gait that mimicked the natural sounds of the desert, and avoided attracting the worms. They could disappear into the sand, summon worms with rhythmic thumpers to cross vast distances, and strike with the sudden violence of a sandstorm, only to vanish back into the landscape, leaving no trace but their dead enemies. It was this desert power that the famed Imperial Sardaukar, the most feared soldiers in the galaxy, would come to learn was a force beyond their comprehension. In the year 10,191, the fateful change came to Arrakis. The Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, in a complex political maneuver, ordered House Atreides to take over the administration of Dune from their bitter rivals, House Harkonnen. Duke Leto Atreides, a man of honor, saw the Fremen not as savages to be suppressed, but as a potential ally, a powerful desert people who could help him secure his rule. He began to extend a hand of friendship, an act of respect the Fremen had not seen in centuries of harsh Harkonnen and imperial neglect. A fragile trust began to form, aided by his swordmaster Duncan Idaho, who served as his emissary and earned the Fremen's respect. But it was a trap. The Emperor had colluded with the Harkonnens to destroy House Atreides. A surprise attack, spearheaded by Harkonnen legions and augmented by the Emperor's own Sardaukar disguised in Harkonnen uniforms, shattered the Atreides forces. Duke Leto was killed, and his house was left in ruins. His son Paul and his Bene Gesserit concubine, the Lady Jessica, escaped into the deep desert, where they were found by a band of Fremen led by the Naib of Sietch, a man named Stilgar. This was the moment the universe pivoted. In Paul, the Fremen saw the echoes of their prophecy. He was from the outer world. His mother was a Bene Gesserit, a witch with strange powers, as the legend foretold. Paul, trained in the Atreides military arts and the Bene Gesserit ways, quickly proved his worth. He survived their trials, bested one of their strongest warriors, Jameis, in a duel to the death, and chose a Fremen name for himself, Muad'Dib. When he and his mother survived the Water of Life ritual, an act that should have killed a male, and Paul emerged with the powers of the Kwisatz Haderach, the prophecy was fulfilled. He was their Messiah. Under his leadership, the Fremen were transformed from scattered defensive tribes into a unified and unstoppable revolutionary army. Paul taught them the Weirding way, organized their guerrilla tactics into a full-scale assault on Harkonnen spice production, and led them personally, riding at the head of his Fedaykin death commandos on the backs of the largest sandworms. He held the entire galaxy hostage. By threatening to destroy the spice, he could cripple the Spacing Guild, end all interstellar travel, and collapse the entire Imperial economy. In a climactic battle, his Fremen warriors did the impossible. They defeated the Emperor's elite Sardaukar legions and captured the Emperor himself. Paul Atreides, the Duke in exile, became the new master of the Imperium. But his victory unleashed the terrible purpose he had foreseen in his prescient visions. The religious fervor of the Fremen, freed from the confines of Arrakis, exploded across the galaxy in a holy war. Paul's jihad, waged in the name of Muad'Dib, swept through the stars like a cleansing fire. Worlds that resisted were crushed. Ancient faiths were eradicated. In 12 standard years, more than 61 billion people were killed, and 40 religions were wiped from existence. The Fremen, once a hidden people fighting for their own survival, became the fanatical vanguard of a new, iron-fisted galactic empire, their religious edicts enforced by the brutal priesthood of the Kwisatz. Yet, this triumph was the beginning of their end. As the new ruling class, the Fremen were brought out of the desert and into the cities and palaces of Arrakis. Water, once the most sacred and scarce of resources, became plentiful as Paul's terraforming programs began to change the planet's climate. The old ways began to die. The harsh discipline, the communal bonds forged in shared hardship, the very essence of what it meant to be Fremen, began to erode in this new era of comfort and power. The older generation watched in horror as their children grew soft, forgetting the traditions that had kept their people alive for thousands of years. This discontent festered, leading to a conspiracy among Fremen dissenters to assassinate the man-god they believed had betrayed them. Though Paul foresaw the plot, he allowed it to unfold, walking into a trap that used a nuclear weapon, a stone burner, to destroy his eyes. Blind, he was now, by ancient Fremen law, a useless burden who must walk into the desert to die. In this final act, Paul, the Emperor of Billions, chose to obey the law of the tribe. He walked alone into the sand, silencing his critics and cementing his legend as a true Fremen to the end. His son, Leto II, would complete the destruction of the old Fremen way. To save humanity from extinction, Leto embarked upon the Golden Path, a 500-year reign of enforced tranquility. He merged his body with the sandtrout, the larval stage of the sandworm, and transformed himself into a monstrous human-worm hybrid, a near-immortal god-emperor. He used his immense lifespan to complete the terraforming of Arrakis, a project started by the planetologist Liet Kynes generations before. The great deserts vanished, replaced by forests, rivers, and oceans. The sandworms died out, and with them, the source of the spice. In achieving the Fremen's ancestral dream of a green and verdant world, he systematically and deliberately destroyed their culture. His word was enforced by the fish speakers, his all-female army drawn from Fremen stock, who ensured his peace held across the galaxy. The way of the stillsuit, the law of water, The bond with Shai-Hulud all became meaningless in a world of abundance. The last few who clung to the old ways were consigned to a living museum, a desert preserve where they could live as their ancestors did, a quaint relic of a forgotten past. After Leto's death, his reign triggered the Great Scattering, a diaspora that sent humanity exploding back out into the uncharted regions of the galaxy. Thousands of years later, a violent sect known as the Honored Matres returned to the old empire. Viewing Arrakis, now called Rakis, as a symbol of the power that had created them, they destroyed it. With planet-destroying weapons called obliterators, they bombarded the surface, boiling the atmosphere away and fusing the sand and rock into a blackened sphere of glass. The cradle of the Fremen was no more. Their monuments, their Sietches, their world, all were erased. Yet, the legacy of the Fremen was not written in sand, but in blood. Their spirit, the unyielding will to survive, the capacity to adapt to any hardship, the ferocity in defense of their own, was carried into the Great Scattering, a genetic and cultural inheritance spread across 1,000,000 worlds. The Fremen of Arrakis were gone, but their echo would shape the destiny of humanity forever.